Tua Tagovailoa had an immensely disturbing head injury, a concussion that happened on Thursday Night Football. Now, Thursday Night Football is a labor issue in and of itself, given the quick turnaround between games. But in this instance, there were two factors that made this a really, really scary situation for not just Tua, but a bunch of players involved. We talked about this on the show previously, but the Dolphins-Bills game, where Tua was clearly concussed in that game, was a health hazard because of the extreme heat. We talked about it on the show and just said how scary it was to see these players so exhausted, throwing up, needing fluids. How the Bills sideline was directly in the sun in Miami, and how as the climate warms due to climate change, these kinds of heat-related health incidents are going to be more frequent, not just in sports, but in sports there is a union, and these are laborers, and there needs to be more effort placed on helping these guys out. Because it was not a safe situation. So they had this exhausting game and then had to immediately get on a plane to go to Cincinnati.
Yeah, so to compound like the already, like labor intensive and kind of grueling travel schedule, to add on for Tua specifically, very clearly, despite whatever kind of, who do you believe, me or your lying eyes type of narrative that the Dolphins and the NFL wanted to perpetuate, Tua had a brain injury from that game, and he was playing on short rest to play Thursday. And clearly, you saw the combination of both of those factors manifest itself really, really gruesomely on that Thursday night game. And I must say, as I know that we had kind of been a little bit reverent of the, personnel and the segments and things like that of the Amazon broadcast, I thought it was kind of abhorrent that they continued to over and over show the slow motion replay of not only the hit, but the fencing motion that came into play when Tua's hands kind of contorted, which is a telltale sign, according to some neurologists and concussion experts, of like neurological damage. So I don't think it's necessary to completely obviate it from the screen, but maybe don't show it 20 times during the broadcast of how severely damaged this guy's brain is as a result of, ostensibly his team not really doing their due diligence and actually protecting him.
Yeah, and what was also unconscionable about that Thursday Night Football broadcast, especially from a guy like Richard Sherman, who has prided himself on being a critic of the league from a pro player perspective, for them to not mention the previous game at all in the halftime broadcast, where that's what created such a scary situation, because concussions are terrible no matter what. But when you have two consecutively in such a short period of time, that's when we get into like, oh, you could die territory. And so that's why messing around with this, is insane. And so, like, yes, we were praising the broadcast for being a bit more youthful and younger and more hip with players, as opposed to it being like, Phil Simms and Boomer, right?
Okay, Boomer Esiason.
Yes, but for this, they were completely, towing the party line until they got critiqued so much on Twitter that in the middle of the broadcast, Al Michaels was like in the third quarter, like, and by the way, Tua, there was another injury that might have created the situation from the Bills game, and so they were covering their ass in the middle of the broadcast.
Yeah, because it was kind of glossed over for a bit. They didn't fully kind of give the kind of entire scope of the context from the week before of what happened in Sunday's game.
And
it's
so,
like, I wonder why.
Yeah.
Who are you protecting by not giving the whole context of why exactly this wasn't a isolated incident, but rather an exacerbated incident?
Yes.
For Tua.
And by the way, Amazon, this is your product. So just something to note about Jeff Bezos' relationship and Amazon's relationship with the NFL. The fact that was not noted until they got a ton of blowback on Twitter about it and had to shoehorn it into the
The
broadcast.
big multinational corporation siding with the corporation over the
No.
players. Come on.
So the protocol obviously is, I mean, the loopholes, it seems to me, since 2009, when Congress had to get involved because the NFL was so negligent towards its players with concussions, and the movies was coming out and there was a national discussion that they have, and I had no evidence for this outside of my just watching of these games, but like T. Higgins, why did he come back into the game versus the Jets? There were just little examples of guys who clearly, I mean, it was Patrick Mahomes that one year in the playoffs, I believe, who came and had a quick turnaround in the playoffs in a concussion. There were just little pieces of evidence that I couldn't put together as because they were just isolated incidents, but things in the back of my mind where I was like, they're getting a little lax with this. They're getting loose with the already insufficient concussion protocols that they have.
And I must say, like, I completely agree. And also, it kind of is making me very skeptical of not only the concussion protocol itself, that like just seemingly they go into a covered tent and then walk out and just go back on the field.
Right.
That's what Tua did, and he literally collapsed and was helped up by his fellow players.
The first time.
Yeah, the first time. This is right, exactly. Not week 4, week 3 when this happened for the first time. But also the other thing is that the unaffiliated concussion coordinator, concussion consultant or whatever the word is, he was fired. Like
Yeah.
the NFLPA made such a broad statement and kind of like spoke out in really really stark terms about how they felt this was handled and what happened, that they were able to kind of get that guy to be terminated. So I'm also wondering, like, if it was enough for it to be a fireable offense, like what was this person actually providing?
No, we need to know. We
that
need to know
position?
what information led that the NFLPA had access to that led to the firing beyond
Absolutely.
the PR exercise.
Like what's the context for his termination, and what exactly is the because
what did he do?
Right.
How did he examine Tua? How did he come
Right.
to a determination that even though all the beat reporters when he went off for the Miami Dolphins were like, yeah, that's a head injury, and I forget if this was the case, but he might have been listed as a head injury, and I don't remember if that's for sure the case.
But the conversation certainly started off as it being he was saddled with a head injury.
Yes.
And then this narrative kind of started creeping out that the reason he fell to the ground was because of an unrelated back injury.
Yeah,
which
it's
to me, listen,
BS.
I'm not an orthopedist, but that seems completely frivolous to me.
He was dizzy and falling over in the Bills game, and it was either, this is the thing, and Pro Football Talk, as always, is my go-to source for league business. Mike Florio has done a really good job of explaining how this loophole has been exploited. But there is a loophole in the concussion protocol called the gross motor instability. Well, they don't call it the loophole, but that's what they're supposed to be monitoring. And so if a player shows gross motor instability, they have to be evaluated for a concussion. Then the unaffiliated neurotrauma consultant, who's still like paid by the league, I think. So they're not unaffiliated, bro. They are paid by the league that has the same incentive, very similar incentive as the Dolphins do, which is to put the players who are starters back on the field and not have them get injured. So it's not unaffiliated.
This is the NFL, every so-called unaffiliated employee, every so-called impartial investigator. Yeah, those investigators into the Washington football team were super impartial. Then when they released their investigation, they were like, "Oh, weird! I didn't take any notes."
I know it's so odd that the yeah, right. I found no wrongdoing here.
And also, if you wanted even to look at my report, I kind of just forgot to disclose anything, weirdly enough. So I guess you just have to take my word for it.
Right.
There's no actually unaffiliated or impartial investigator, arbiter. The NFL is like I don't even know how you really say the word.
It's a kangaroo court.
It's an Ouroboros. It's like a snake that eats its own tail.
Yes.
It's just constantly cyclical in that way. But the other thing I will say, and I hate to do this because I don't really hate to do this because I don't really care about that much, but I've been genuinely, from a football perspective and from a personal perspective, been enjoying Mike McDaniel these first few
Mm.
weeks, but I can't let that cloud or shroud my scrutiny of kind of his comments, and also being so definitive in saying I would never put him in that position. I would never put one of my guys in that position. I'm a player's coach. Like, he I would have never, like, if I had even had an inkling that he had a concussion or couldn't play, I wouldn't have let him. With also seeing what we saw out there. I'm not like I might be young, but I wasn't born yesterday. All
Yeah.
right, and then two, um, his comments basically being like, we're lucky it's just a concussion. Well, a concussion is a brain injury.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it's not really just a concussion.
I know. And McDaniel,
it is your brain is bleeding and bruising.
perhaps I'm an idiot and I just like Mike McDaniel. I do think he has his players' backs to a degree, but part of it is that's can't be the only thing, because Tua, I'm sure, wants to come back in. So maybe having his back is like listening to your guy, but your guy doesn't. You can't. Their contracts, the narratives about them in the league, their team rallying behind them, all matters on their availability. That's how they are judged. And so you can't take a guy who's going to be self-interested in that way, in the narrow sense, and you can't take his word for it on a brain injury.
They're never gonna want to come out.
Never.
They are never going to be like, you know what? You're right. These guys, their job, what they are paid to do is compete.
Yeah.
They are paid millions of dollars to, through thick and thin, shed their blood, sweat, and tears to win football games for their teams. You being Mike McDaniel, you being the coaching staff, it is incumbent upon you as the authority figures in the organization on the sideline to tell the player, I understand you want to go in,
Right.
but you cannot jeopardize your health like this.
And so just back to the loophole really quickly. The thing that is what needs to be closed about the way that this is constructed in the NFL bylaws is that the gross motor instability thing needs to just be an automatic out, right? And it doesn't have to be like if the player fell over or tripped. There's no they're out for the rest of the game. That's how it has to be. There's no unaffiliated neurotrauma consultant who is determining if it had a neurological cause. If they're falling over themselves in the way that Tua did, they're out for the game. And they're not allowed to play for a week. And that includes if they have a Thursday Night Football turnaround. Because the NFL got greedy as hell. And they said, I want Thursday Night Football because we have more primetime ratings that are going to come into this. And they did this big deal with Amazon for that reason. And the union, they agreed to it because, hey, yes, player safety is their priority, but also the union is going to be swayed when more money is coming in and more money for the players. So that's how they got the union on board with it. But at this point, Thursday Night Football is a labor issue. It is a health hazard. And so there still needs to be, from a concussion perspective, a protocol that carries over through Thursday Night Football. That should have been treated as you're out for a week as soon as Tua fell down like that. And it's just so dumb too, right? Like, they have Teddy Bridgewater for this exact reason. Tua is a smaller guy. I have questions about durability for that reason. And one of the things I have a question about him, I don't question his heart, his character. He seems like the team loves him, a great guy. But you have to protect your guys. And Tua is vulnerable in that sense, given his stature. So that's why you guys signed Teddy Bridgewater, for this whole reason. So throwing him back in there was just, I know it's brought increased scrutiny on the league. I saw it over the weekend that, the anybody who looked like they got a hit to the head, they were going out a lot more quickly than they would because the NFL is in CYA mode. But
what the refs call a makeup call.
Yeah, right. And more like this was such an egregious penalty that they did like 20 makeup calls throughout the league. I mean, it was so the NFL, this could really, if they don't respond adequately to this, set them back so many years. And the game is inherently violent, and it makes me, when I see things like that, of course it evokes this like disgusted feeling and conflict, right? But I want the game to improve, and this was a major setback for that.
Because it's hard because that disgust or that guilt that you feel is partially because it's a very, very nauseating feeling to see that happen, have it replayed over and over, see the fallout of the guy, being helped off the field, and then them going, and then the broadcast booth going back to being like, what does this mean for the Dolphins season now that Teddy Bridgewater might be seeing more snaps under center?
Yeah.
It's hard. The cognitive dissonance is so strong in a league like the NFL, where you can see bruising, violent acts like that clearly will not only manifest in the short term, but manifest in the long term.
Yeah.
That will have consequences probably for the rest of Tua's life, potentially.
Yeah, and I would encourage people. Rodney Harrison had a pretty awesome rant in the lead up to Sunday Night Football, just pleading with young players, just, if you have a head injury, don't force yourself back into the game, because that was inherently a culture of football, and it's not. Honestly, guys, what's so crazy about it is on the professional level, there's the more sunlight on it than there is in any other part of the game. The most sunlight on it. College football, not so much. High school football, I hear stories from like my boyfriend when he was playing football about like not remembering things and coach forcing him back into the game and things like that. There needs to be this is why the NFL needs to lead with example, because it trickles down. So we got to move on, but man, it was a tough watch.